I never thought my story would start with steel-toed boots and the smell of garbage. But here I was, 22, freshly graduated, and instead of walking into some glass-walled office like most of my classmates, I was standing in front of a fleet of dented green trucks, clutching a uniform 2 sizes too big. Most of my friends were polishing resumes, rehearsing interview answers, bragging about offers in finance, tech, law. My parents had other plans for me. They own one of the biggest waste management companies in the city. Not just garbage pickup, a whole empire. Contracts with municipalities, recycling centers, treatment plants, entire neighborhoods depending on their trucks rolling in every morning before sunrise. It was their legacy. One day, it would be mine. But not yet. When I graduated, my parents sat me down at our polished mahogany dining table and told me very calmly that I wouldn't be starting at the top. No cushy title, no private office. If I wanted to lead this company someday, I had to understand it from the ground up. That meant no one could know who I was. No special treatment. No whispers about the boss's daughter. Just me, the uniform, and the job. I thought it sounded almost romantic, like undercover royalty. I'd earn respect with sweat, not with my last name. At least that's how I imagined it. Reality hit the first morning at 4:30 a.m., when I pulled on stiff boots and climbed onto the back of a truck under a sky still heavy with stars. The air was sharp, and the smell, God, the smell, clung to my hair, my clothes, even my skin, no matter how much soap I used later. The crew barely acknowledged me. A few nods, a grunted, "New girl?" And that was it. By 7 a.m., I was already soaked in something I didn't want to identify, my arms aching from dragging bins that felt twice my weight. I kept my head down, copying whatever the others did. I wanted to belong, or at least not be the obvious weak link. It was humbling. Every part of me screamed that I wasn't built for this. Not my soft hands, not my sore back, not the way my stomach turned with every rotten smell. But somewhere between the slamming of lids and the rumble of the truck, I started noticing things I never had before. The quiet pride in the way the older guys tied down loads, so nothing spilled. The small jokes they shared to break up the monotony. The rhythm they moved in, like a team of dancers no one ever clapped for. They were invisible to the world, but indispensable. And I was learning painfully that leadership wasn't about sitting in an office with a title. It was about knowing what it meant to carry the weight, literally. That first day ended with me collapsing onto my bed still in uniform, too tired to eat, too drained to even cry. My phone buzzed with messages from friends bragging about job offers and salaries. I turned it face down. I wasn't ready to tell anyone what I was doing, because right then I wasn't a CEO's daughter. I wasn't an heiress to a multi-million-dollar business. I was just the new girl hauling trash in the rain. And if I was going to survive this, I had to prove I belonged here. Not to my parents, not to the company, but to myself. The second morning felt even heavier than the first. My muscles screamed in protest as I pulled on my uniform again. It was stiff with the ghost of yesterday's grime, and though I'd washed it, the faint sour odor clung like a shadow. I stared at myself in the mirror. Hair tied back, no makeup, baggy shirt tucked into oversized pants, steel-toed boots planted on the floor. For the first time in my life, I didn't look like myself. I looked like one of them. At the yard, the crews milled around smoking cigarettes, sipping burnt coffee from gas station cups, trading stories. Nobody asked my name. Nobody cared. To them, I was just new girl. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Better to be invisible than to be exposed. But invisibility has its own price. "Hey, princess," one of the older guys said with a crooked grin. He shoved a stack of bins my way. "Line these up nice and straight. Don't want the customers crying about aesthetics." A laugh rippled through the group. I forced a smile, took the bins, and started dragging them into order. They were heavier than they looked, metal clanking and rattling as I lined them along the curb. By the time I finished, sweat ran down my back, and the guys had already moved on to loading easier tasks. That became the pattern. Every day, I was handed the newbie jobs, the dirtiest, the heaviest, the kind no one else wanted. Sorting sticky recyclables that clung to my gloves, hauling bins from alleyways filled with puddles and rats, sweeping up spills after everyone else had finished. At first, I told myself it was fair. Everyone has to pay their dues. But sometimes I caught the smirk on Ron's face, the senior driver assigned to my crew. He was broad-shouldered, with a belly that hinted at too many beers, and eyes that seemed permanently narrowed in suspicion. He watched me with a mix of amusement and calculation, as if he was still deciding whether I was worth breaking. One morning, when the rain was coming down in thin, cold sheets, Ron tossed me the keys to the storage shed. "Fetch the extra liners," he said, jerking his chin toward the far side of the yard. It wasn't part of my job. The liners were his responsibility. I knew that from the briefing. Still, I bit my tongue, shoved my hands deeper into my wet gloves, and trudged across the yard. By the time I returned, soaked to the skin, Ron was leaning against the truck, smirking like he'd just won a bet. "Good girl," he said. Something burned inside me then, not just anger, but shame. I hated that I let him talk to me like that. I hated that I didn't push back. But what was I supposed to do? I couldn't risk drawing too much attention. Not yet. That night, I opened my notebook. It was just a cheap spiral-bound pad I kept by my bed, but it became my sanctuary. I wrote down everything: the stares, the nicknames, the weight of the bins, the ache in my hands. I even drew little tally marks for each time Ron tried to pawn off his work on me. By the end of the week, the page was crowded with lines. I didn't tell anyone about the notebook. Not my parents, not my friends, not even myself out loud. But it was proof. Proof that I was enduring this, that I wasn't folding. Still, a question lingered in the back of my mind. How long could I keep being the quiet new girl before something inside me snapped? By the end of my second week, I thought I was getting used to the grind. My body still hurt, but the shock was fading. Muscles were hardening, calluses forming. I told myself I was adjusting. I even started to believe it, until the storm. That morning, the sky was a heavy bruise, swollen with thunder. We had barely left the yard before the rain came down in sheets, cold and merciless. My uniform clung to me like wet paper, boots squelching with every step. Within minutes, I was soaked straight through, hair plastered to my forehead, teeth chattering. The job didn't stop. Trash doesn't wait for the weather. We hauled bins that slid in the mud, lids that slammed shut like guillotines. Black bags burst under my grip, spilling soggy cardboard, food scraps, things I didn't dare identify. The stench mixed with the rain, thick and sour. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept my head down and pushed. One bin, then another, then another. But my arms gave out near the end of the route. I was dragging a container uphill when it slipped from my grasp and rolled backward, spilling its contents into the gutter. For a moment, I just stood there, rain running into my eyes, watching a river of trash swirl around my boots. My body refused to move. That's when I heard a voice. "Need a hand?" It was Sam, the youngest guy on the crew besides me. He had dark hair plastered to his forehead, water streaming down his jacket. He didn't laugh, he didn't smirk. He just bent down, gripped the bin with me, and together we muscled it back into place. "Don't let them get to you," he muttered under his breath, barely audible over the rain. "They dumped this route on you because you're new. They did the same to me." His words hit me harder than the storm. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one who'd been tested, humiliated, pushed to breaking. "Thanks," I whispered. My voice cracked, but he only nodded, like it wasn't a big deal. Like it was normal to save someone from drowning in trash. By the time the shift ended, I could barely feel my fingers. We rode back in silence, the truck's heater blasting lukewarm air that smelled faintly of diesel. Everyone else chatted, but I just stared out the window, rain streaking down the glass, replaying Sam's words. That night, I collapsed onto my bed still damp, my notebook open beside me. I wrote only one sentence. Today, I almost broke. But I didn't break alone. For the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. By the third week, the novelty of having the new girl around had worn off. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a target. It started with little things. Someone forgot to secure a lid, so when I went to lift the bin, the contents spilled all over my boots. A bag of recyclables conveniently ripped just as I grabbed it, showering me in sticky soda and shards of plastic. The others laughed it off, called it rookie luck. But the pattern was too precise. It wasn't luck. It was a game. And Ron was the referee. He never outright ordered me around. He was too smart for that. Instead, he'd lean against the truck, arms folded, and say things like, "New girl, why don't you take this one? You're closer." Or, "Think you can handle this load? Show us what you're made of." Always with that smirk, that glint in his eyes that told me he was waiting for me to crack. At first, I told myself I could handle it. I'd volunteered for this, hadn't I? This was the price of learning the business. Humility, grit, earning respect. But respect didn't come. Just more trash, more smirks, more whispers. The breaking point came one sweltering afternoon at the recycling center. The air inside was thick with heat, and the sour-sweet stench of fermenting cans. I was stationed at the conveyor belt, sorting bottles and plastics until my gloves turned black. Ron strolled past, sipping water like a king surveying peasants. "Hey, princess," he called over the clatter of machinery. "Don't miss the glass." Management hates when glass ends up in plastics. I gritted my teeth and kept sorting. He didn't stop. "Careful, don't chip a nail." Laughter rippled down the line. Something inside me twisted. My hands shook, not from exhaustion but from rage. I wanted to rip off my gloves, throw them in his face, and scream who I really was. To tell him that I wasn't just some rookie he could push around. I was the daughter of the people who signed his checks. But I swallowed it. Revealing my name would ruin everything. Instead, I wrote it all down that night in my notebook. Every insult, every laugh, every smirk, page after page, black ink bleeding into the paper. By the time I finished, my hand ached and my chest felt hollow. When I closed the notebook, I stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, "How much longer can I keep pretending this doesn't hurt?" The answer came back in silence, and I realized for the first time that this job wasn't just testing my body. It was testing who I was. The day it finally happened was gray and heavy, the kind of day where the air feels like wet cloth pressing against your skin. We were short-staffed, half the crew out sick or sick, which meant the rest of us carried double the load. By noon, I was running on fumes. My arms ached from dragging bins up slippery alleys, and my raincoat had given up hours ago, leaving me soaked to the bone. I told myself, one more route. Just get through one more. That's when Ron decided he was done. We had 2 streets left on the schedule. He tossed his gloves into the truck, stretched like a man settling into a recliner, and waved me toward the bins. "You got this, princess," he said casually. "I'm heading out early." I blinked rain out of my eyes. "What?" "You heard me. Finish the route." He smirked, already reaching for his jacket. Something in me snapped. For weeks, I'd swallowed every insult, every extra task, every trick. I'd told myself it was part of the job, part of earning respect. But standing there, drenched and shaking, watching him walk away from his own work like it was nothing, I couldn't do it anymore. "No." The word came out sharper than I expected, slicing through the patter of rain. Ron froze, half-turned. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice louder now. "I'm not doing your work. I've got my own. If you're tired, fine, but don't dump it on me." For a moment, silence. Even the rain seemed to pause. Then he laughed, a low, humorless sound. "Careful," he said, stepping closer. "Management might not like it if I start talking about your attitude." My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. My heart pounded so hard I thought he could hear it. "Then let's go to management right now," I said evenly. His smirk faltered. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncertain. His eyes searched mine, waiting for me to flinch, to back down. I didn't. We stood there, rain dripping from our helmets, the truck engine idling in the background. Finally, he muttered something under his breath, turned, and stalked off toward the cab. He didn't dump his work on me again that day. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. My arms still ached, my body still screamed for rest, but inside, something was different. A fire had lit itself in my chest. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. That night, when I wrote in my notebook, I didn't fill the page with complaints or tally marks. I wrote one line, scrawled in bold, messy letters. Today, I said no. It didn't seem like much, just 2 letters, 1 word. But for me, it was the beginning of everything. Word travels fast on a crew. By the next morning, everyone knew what had happened with Ron. They didn't say it directly, but I could feel it in the sideways glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. Even Sam looked at me differently, curious, maybe even a little impressed. But not everyone saw it that way. By lunch break, I was called into the supervisor's trailer. The air inside was thick with stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Mike, the shift supervisor, sat behind a cluttered desk, flipping through paperwork like it was more interesting than me. He was a heavy-set man with deep lines around his eyes, the kind carved by years of late nights and angry phone calls. He didn't look up when he spoke. "Got a complaint about you." My stomach tightened. I sat stiffly in the folding chair, rain dripping from my jacket onto the linoleum floor. From who? Doesn't matter, he said, finally raising his eyes. What matters is attitude. You're new. You're supposed to listen, not stir things up. Heat flushed my face. I opened my mouth, ready to argue, but the words caught in my throat. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading since my first day. One wrong move, and I'd be painted as difficult. Worse, they might start asking questions I couldn't answer. I wanted to tell him the truth, to say, I'm not just some rookie. I'm the daughter of the people who own this entire company. If anyone's got a right to stand up to Ron, it's me. The words burned on the tip of my tongue. My notebook, my sleepless nights, my aching muscles, they all screamed for me to reveal myself, to finally throw down the card I'd been hiding. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed hard and said, I'm just trying to do my job. Mike studied me for a long moment. His gaze was heavy, like he was peeling back layers, looking for cracks. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Look, this work isn't for everyone. People quit all the time. If you want to last, you need to learn when to push and when to shut up. I nodded, even though my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Dismissed, I stepped back into the drizzle outside, the noise of the yard crashing over me like a wave. Trucks roared, men shouted, bins clattered. But it all sounded distant, muffled by the pounding of my own heartbeat. I had held my secret a little longer, but the walls were closing in. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. My hand shook as I scrawled the words. I almost told them today. I wanted to shout it, but I can't. Not yet. I stared at the sentence until the ink blurred with my tears. Because as much as I wanted to be honest, I knew the truth. If they saw me as the heiress, they'd never see me as one of them. And right now, I needed to be one of them more than anything. That night after the meeting with Mike, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the notebook open beside me. Pages of inked frustration and pain stared back. For the first time, I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. Why am I still here? I could walk away, quit, go back to my parents, demand a comfortable office, a salary, respect handed to me on a silver platter. No one would stop me. No one could. But the thought made me sick, because I realized it wasn't respect if I didn't earn it. It wasn't leadership if I hadn't lived it. So instead of quitting, I wrote a letter I never intended to send, to my parents. I told them about the rain, the stink, the endless jokes at my expense. I told them about Ron, about Sam, about how small I felt every single day. I ended it with one sentence. If I'm ever going to run this company, I need to know what it feels like to break and still get back up. The next morning, I shoved the unsent letter into my notebook, pulled on my boots, and went back. We were already behind schedule. One truck had broken down, and our crew was short again. The yard buzzed with frustration, men shouting over each other, everyone waiting for someone else to take charge. Ron stood off to the side, arms crossed, enjoying the chaos. For a moment, I hesitated. It wasn't my place. I was still the rookie. But then I thought of that letter, of the words I hadn't dared send. And something inside me clicked. Split the route, I said loudly, stepping into the circle. 2 crews, 2 streets each. Sam and I can cover the west side. It's lighter today. That leaves the heavy pickup for you guys. We'll all meet back here by 3 heads turned. Stares landed on me like spotlights. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to keep going. It's faster this way, I added firm. Otherwise, we'll miss the deadline. And we all know what happens when management hears about late pickups. A long pause. Then Sam stepped forward. She's right, he said simply, grabbing his gloves. One by one, the others moved, grumbling but falling into line. Even Ron, though his glare could have cut steel, climbed back into the truck without a word. And just like that, the yard shifted from chaos to motion. By the end of the day, we'd finished on time. Barely. My body ached in every joint, but the sense of victory hummed through me like electricity. That night, when I opened my notebook, I didn't just write about pain. I wrote about leadership, about how for the first time people had listened. Not because of my name, not because of my family, but because of me. Today, I didn't just survive. I scribbled, my hand trembling with excitement. Today, I led. I closed the notebook and let myself smile. For the first time since this job began, I felt like I belonged. The victory from yesterday carried me into work like armor. My body still ached, but my mind was sharp, lit with the fire of having finally proven myself. Sam greeted me with a nod that felt almost like respect, and even the others seemed less dismissive. For a moment, I let myself believe the worst was behind me. I should have known better. Halfway through our shift, I went to retrieve equipment from the yard shed. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first, a rancid, suffocating stench that clawed down my throat. Inside, the garbage bins that were supposed to be locked away for collection had been dumped across the floor. Food scraps, rotting paper, sour liquid pooling in the corners. Someone had sabotaged it, and not just anyone. Ron stood a few feet away, leaning against the wall, arms folded like a man admiring his work. "Looks like the rookies got cleanup duty," he sneered. My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew. He shrugged. "Because you got too comfortable yesterday. Thought you could start giving orders. Thought you were one of us. Time for a reminder." For a moment, fury burned hot in my chest. I wanted to scream, to rip off the mask I'd been wearing and tell him exactly who I was. The boss's daughter, the future owner, the one person he couldn't afford to humiliate. But the words stuck in my throat. Because deep down, I knew if I played that card, I'd lose everything I'd fought for. So instead, I took a slow breath and said, "Fine." I grabbed the mop and the bucket, and while Ron smirked, waiting for me to break, I started to clean. It was brutal. The smell sank into my hair, my skin, my clothes. My hands shook from the effort of dragging heavy, soaked rags across the concrete. At one point, I gagged so hard I thought I'd be sick, but I didn't stop. By the time I was done, my body felt hollowed out, but the floor gleamed. When I straightened, I found Sam standing in the doorway. He hadn't said a word, just watched quietly. But the look on his face, hard, tight, furious, told me everything. He knew who had done this, and unlike me, he wasn't afraid to speak. That evening, as we sat in the break room, Sam dropped into the chair beside me. "Don't let him win," he said softly. I stared at the table, exhausted. "Feels like he already has." Sam shook his head. "No, you cleaned up his mess and didn't back down. That's more than most people would have done." His words warmed something in me I hadn't realized was frozen. Maybe I hadn't lost. Maybe I'd just passed a test Ron didn't even know he'd given. But still, as I walked home that night, the anger gnawed at me. Ron wanted to break me, to remind me I didn't belong. What he didn't realize was that every attempt only carved my resolve deeper. And soon, very soon, I would show him exactly how wrong he was. After the sabotage, something shifted in the air. The crew still joked, still gave me the hardest tasks, but there was a difference, a kind of unspoken awareness. Sam, especially, stayed close. He didn't say it out loud, but I could feel it. He knew Ron had gone too far. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see me differently. But Ron wasn't finished. 2 days later, we were loading bins when he leaned toward another worker and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "She doesn't belong here." Look at her hands. Too soft. Bet she's never worked a day in her life before this. The words sliced sharper than I expected, because there was truth in them. I hadn't grown up like them. I hadn't known what it meant to work until now. But instead of firing back, I forced myself to stay quiet. Still, whispers began to spread. Questions I couldn't control. That afternoon, as I changed out of my uniform in the locker room, I caught 2 of the women talking. "She's different," one said. "Doesn't act like a newbie." "Yeah," the other replied, almost like she knows more than she lets on. I froze, my heart pounding. The walls of my secret life were thinning. And then came the moment I dreaded. At the end of the week, the regional manager, a man who knew my parents well, came to tour the site. He shook hands, inspected the trucks, nodded at the crew. When his eyes landed on me, recognition sparked. "Ah," he said warmly. "You must be—" I cut him off with a sharp shake of my head, panic surging through me. "Just part of the team," I blurted. "That's all." He blinked, confused, but moved on. Sam didn't miss it. Later, as we hauled the last bins of the day, he shot me a look. What was that about? I tried to laugh it off. Nothing. He thought I was someone else, but Sam's gaze lingered, skeptical. He didn't push, but the question hung between us, like smoke. That night, back in my tiny apartment, I sat with my notebook open, staring at the blank page. My secret was crumbling. The crew was starting to wonder, and I couldn't keep lying forever. The thought terrified me, not because of what they'd think about my family, but because of what they'd think about me. Would they believe I'd been genuine? That I'd worked beside them not as a spoiled heir, but as someone who wanted to earn respect? Or would they see it all as a lie? For the first time since I'd started, the fear wasn't about breaking under the weight of the work. It was about losing the fragile trust I'd built. I pressed my pen to the paper and wrote the only words that made sense. The truth is coming. I don't know if I'm ready, but maybe I never will be. The day it all came crashing down started like any other. Gray skies, heavy routes, a crew already grumbling before we even left the yard. I pulled on my gloves, ready to push through, when Ron cornered me near the trucks. He was smirking again, that same cruel, satisfied curl of his lips. "You think you're special, don't you?" he taunted. "Giving orders, acting like you belong. But you're not one of us. You never will be." Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in resolve. I was tired of hiding, tired of letting his words poison the air. So when the regional manager returned later that morning to inspect the routes, and Ron made another jab about me being princess of the bins, I didn't stop the truth this time. Instead, I straightened my back and said clearly, so the whole crew could hear, "My name is Emily. My parents own this company, and one day, it's going to be mine to run." The yard fell silent. Sam froze mid-step. A few jaws dropped. Ron's smirk collapsed into stunned silence. The words hung heavy, echoing louder than any truck engine. "I didn't come here for special treatment," I continued, my voice trembling but steady. "I came here to learn. To understand the work you do every day, because I can't lead a company if I don't respect the people who keep it running. That's why I kept it a secret. Not to trick you, not to insult you, but because I needed this experience to be real." No one spoke at first. My chest tightened with fear. This was it. The moment I'd lose them. And then Sam stepped forward. He didn't look angry or betrayed. He just studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You've done the same work we all have," he said quietly. "Earned the same blisters. That's real enough for me." A ripple moved through the group. Some still looked uncertain, even wary, but others nodded too. Not everyone. Not yet. But enough. Ron, of course, exploded. "You lied," he shouted. "You made us look like fools." I met his glare head on. "No, I showed you that I can work just as hard as anyone here. If that makes you feel like a fool, that's not on me." For once, Ron had no comeback. The manager cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, and moved on to his inspection. The crew dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves, throwing glances my way. The rest of the shift was quiet, heavy, but different. The weight of the secret was gone. That night, when I opened my notebook, my hand shook as I wrote. Today, I stopped hiding. Today, I claimed who I am. Not just a daughter, not just a worker, but both. Maybe they won't all accept me. Maybe some never will. But leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being honest. And for the first time, I feel like a leader. I closed the notebook, set down my pen, and let the silence of the room wrap around me. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. But I finally knew this much. I had a place here. Not because of my last name. Not because of what I might inherit. But because I'd earned it. Our story is reaching its final chapter. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Would you make the same choice or take a completely different path? Tell us your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.